Welcome to For Good Measure, an interview series celebrating diverse composers and other creative artists, sponsored by a grant from the California Arts Council. I'm Nanette McGuinness, Artistic Executive Director of Ensemble for these times. In this week's episode, we continue our conversation with Rajna Swaminathan, who we spoke to in January 2024. You work in the realm of collective improvisation. Can you talk about that and what role improvisation plays in your compositional process and some of the ways that you fuse composition and performance?
Sure, yeah, I think, improvisation is central to the kind of music that I make. I was first, I think, a composer for improvisers before I even ventured into composing in a through composed way. Um, I think it's been so central because, well, Carnatic music is an improvised music, jazz is improvised. There's a lot of resonances between those two traditions, and I think it's just very central to who I am as a musician, to be able to improvise and to have that be a way of getting to know yourself as well as getting to know the world and other musics and other people. Um, so I often do find a way to center that in the music that I write. So in 2013, I started this group called Rajas, which I had mentioned, uh, as a kind of way to, well, figure out how to situate the mridangam in an ensemble context that wasn't the Carnatic one.
Mm-hmm.
It started with just open forms that were intended for improvisation, often ones that explored polyrhythms, which was something I was really curious about because they sort of exist in Indian music, but it's a little different. So I was studying a lot about kind of Afro-Cuban rhythm and West African approaches and how that had found its way into jazz. Um, and I just found a lot of depth in pursuing that curiosity because it does open up different ways of listening. And it sort of forced me to expand my perspective on how I hear and sort of listen to music actively as an improviser and otherwise. So I try to center that usually, even in the work that I've written for classical musicians, it ends up being a major component. I think more recently I've thought of it in terms of memory. Maybe it's not an accident that this is coming up for me some years after I've sort of taken a step back from the Carnatic music world because things do sort of, I feel like I'm experiencing some kind of resurgence of things, which is that it's no longer that I'm actively engaged with this music, but now just these fragments of memory are coming through. And what's beautiful about the memory is that it's creative.
Mm-hmm.
It's not just about reproducing something that you heard. It's actually about listening to something that has been in your body and has been swimming around in the depths for some time and has been growing with you almost. So it feels very personal, but also it feels like it connects you to a place and time in the past or or in the future, whatever it is. Um, there's a kind of dynamic nature to it, and so I've been exploring that in a lot of my compositions recently. But in some ways, it's been part of how I approach improvisation interculturally anyway, because I've never really been interested in, like I work with a lot of jazz musicians. I'm never going to them and saying, here's the authentic way to play this raga. I'm
Mm.
usually writing a sort of melodic contour or rhythmic idea and I give it to them. And I want them to do what feels good with it for them so that I learn more about what this contour can be in the world. And maybe it evokes certain memories for them or it evokes a certain kind of approach for them. And I'm more curious about learning about that than I am in imposing a certain kind of ornament or certain kind of like inflection. Um, onto the musical material. I mean, there's times when I do pursue that kind of specificity, but I think more of the curiosity is around, okay, what do you do with this? And how do you hear,
Mm-hmm.
how do we come together around this musical idea and allow our perspectives on it to coexist, both my perhaps very specific memory with it and your like more recent engagement with it and whatever it evokes for you. and to learn together about this form and really see it from multiple perspectives. And improvisation is just kind of the best way to do that because it sometimes it allows you to bring things forward that you don't know are there, you know.
Mhm.
So
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, and so that's more of a kind of a jazz context. How would you translate that if you were doing, say, improvisational composition for classical chamber music, or would it be very similar?
there are some similarities. I think the only main difference I guess I see is the level of notation involved,
Right.
um, or the kind of specificity of notation involved. Um, as far as what mentors in the classical music scene have told me, they're like, oh, you just have to be really specific about duration, and it's taught me a lot. It's taught me a lot about things that we might assume otherwise, or that we can rely on a kind of shared language, and when that doesn't necessarily exist, to be able to conjure that kind of specificity and say, actually no, it's this kind of length, this kind of tempo, this kind of dynamic, and coming up with language for that, whether it's relying on standard notational practices or adding some text
Mm-hmm.
to help a performer know what I'm talking about. And so that it's not just, completely open, but it's sort of open within a certain set of boundaries. Um, and I think notationally speaking, a lot of a lot of it ends up looking kind of like box notation with these note palettes or perhaps a phrase that I will offer some kind of language to help them approach it. Um, Again, more recently I've been drawing uh on the performer's memory also and trying to get them to meet me somewhere um with what they bring to it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's I've just been trying various things. Sometimes graphics help. Um, orient an ensemble.
Sure,
So
sure. Yeah, so the nuts and bolts involve boxes and graphs and occasionally staff, staff paper, whatever. What do you do about in terms of the pitch realm? Because the scales and pitches and spaces between the notes are different in the
well, I think that's I don't um to me that's I guess less important.
mm.
Partly there's some myth around Indian music being microtonal, which is it's not really microtonal. It's that
Okay.
it moves in the space between tones, but it still lands on a pitch, or
Huh.
it works within these discrete pitches. It's in the sense that it's different from like Makam traditions where they actually land on a note that might be between like the notes of the keyboard, right? So
Right.
in this case, the tunings might be slightly different, and I'm not totally educated on exactly what the tunings are, so I just deal with the equal temperament when when I need to. And again, it's not so important for me that like we get stuck on that because I'm not looking for an authentic reproduction of something that's Indian classical music, but I'm looking to exist in that in between space. And so
Mm-hmm.
whatever microtonality is natural, I try to find, you know, a space for that, I guess,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
for the ways that people interpret it rather than trying to specify
Mm-hmm.
exactly what it is. Um,
Right. So that makes it easier to live in that liminal space, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it opens up more possibilities for a piece, for people to bring their own understandings to it.
Right. And so that's how you incorporate the improvisation into the classical space as well.
Yeah, I mean, and there's degrees, right? I think there's sometimes things are quite open, and other times, they're open within certain restrictions. It sort of depends on the context, and I think um, I've been trying to see how far I can push it.
Yeah, why not, right? That's the whole point of being creative is to see what happens if you go to the edges.
Absolutely. And it's sometimes it's easier when I know the performer or like if I'm working with a soloist, then I can have a dialogue with them. If it's not so easy to have that conversation, then I need to make sure it's in some specific form of notation so that you know,
Yeah.
whatever happens can be acceptable within a certain realm of possibilities. But
Yeah. So
it's been a learning curve for me, honestly, because it just sometimes it works well, sometimes I'm just like, oh, okay, that's what happens when I do that. But so it's been fun to kind of experiment with that.
yeah, so part of it is what you've learned about how to work with other performers and composers and what communications are successful and what perhaps lead to interesting results that you didn't intend but you like, and what are just like leaving you scratching your head.
Yeah, yeah. But so far I've had good experiences with everybody who's played my music. They've been open and curious and interested in that kind of dialogue.
Yeah, I think they would need to be, just because
Mm,
if they were going to step into that world.
yeah.
Thank you for listening to For Good Measure, and a special thank you to our guest, Rajna Swaminathan, for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to our podcast by clicking on the subscribe button and support us by sharing it with your friends, posting about it on social media, and leaving us a rating and a review. To learn more about E4TT, our concert season online and in the Bay Area, or to make a tax-deductible donation, please visit us at e4tt.org. This podcast is made possible in part by a grant from the California Arts Council and generous donors like you. For Good Measure is produced by Nanette McGuinness and Ensemble for These Times and designed by Brennan Stokes, with special thanks to co-producer and audio engineer Stephanie M. Neumann. Remember to keep supporting equity in the arts and tune in next week for Good Measure.